Terrorism is the deliberate and systematic targeting of the innocent, of civilians, of non-combatants, for political or ideological ends. This is what defines terrorism. It's always evil. So there are no good terrorists and no bad terrorists. There are only bad terrorists, equally guilty. That's very important to have that moral clarity. That's the underpinning of the battle against terrorism.
These are the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, current Prime Minister of Israel and the leader of the Likud party. Ironically, the Likud party was founded by Menachem Begin, that before the foundation of Israel was the leader of the terrorist organization known as the Irgun. He became the first Prime Minister of Israel from the Likud party. The second Prime Minister of Israel from the Likud party was Yitzhak Shamir. He also, before the foundation of Israel, was the leader of a terrorist organization known as Lehi. This video aims to explore the history of Zionist terrorism and how it has been erased by Zionist propaganda. To add historical context and to show how Zionists erase part of their history, I'm going to play a video from the channel Unpacked. They have a series about the history of Israel where they show themselves as moderates, up to be critical of Israel, but at the same time they just repeat Israeli propaganda and deny or gloss over historical events like the Nakba that goes against Zionist propaganda.
Quick history lesson, what is now modern-day Israel was colonized by the British from 1923 to 1948. It was called the British Mandate of Palestine, or simply the British Mandate for our purposes. In 1921, in response to spreading Arab violence against Jews and the British Mandate, these social Zionists established the Haganah, an illegal underground army. It practiced a policy of havlaga, or restraint. Fighters were instructed to only defend Jewish communities, not incite violence against the Arabs or the British. After particularly bad bouts of Arab riots against Jewish settlements in 1929, 31, and 37, fed-up Haganah commanders, led by Jabotinsky, launched a rival militia called the Irgun, dedicated to armed struggle against the British and the Arabs. Not too long after, the British implemented something called the White Paper of 1939.
The problem here is that the Irgun didn't start operations in 1939, but in 1937. The members of the organization were coming from the revisionist Zionist movement. Most had been part of the youth paramilitary organization known as Betar or Beitar. The only thing that Unpacked has to say about revisionist Zionism is
these revisionist Zionists felt social Zionists were too weak and passive in the face of British rule and Arab oppression.
But we should have a deeper look. The revisionist Zionist movement is a far-right branch of Zionism, founded by Jabotinsky. The goal of the revisionist Zionist movement was the establishment of a Jewish state in mandatory Palestine and Jordan through military means. Jabotinsky was also the founder of Betar and held a huge influence in the Irgun until 1940. If I need to talk ideologically about Jabotinsky, I would say that he was at least fascist adjacent. Many Zionists might say that this is a mischaracterization, but he liked the uniforms, the special salutes, was extremely nationalistic, militaristic, and founded the Betar Naval Academy in Italy with the blessing of Mussolini, having as the head of the academy the local leader of the Black Shirts. Going back to the Irgun, their activities between 1937 and 1939 are characterized by the indiscriminate killing of Palestinian Arabs. They shot at bystanders, planted explosive mines in the surrounding roads and paths to Arab villages, threw grenades into crowds, buses, bombed cafes, cinemas, train stations. They bombed crowded vegetable markets using nail bombs or heavy explosives on 5 different occasions. It is not until 1939 that they target their first non-civilian, a member of the Criminal Investigative Department. They kill him and his bodyguard by planting a mine in the path to his home. After all of this is when the British established the White Paper. The Irgun is not happy as the White Paper limits the amount of migration of Jewish members of the diaspora to mandatory Palestine. As an answer, they launch a campaign of sabotage against British infrastructure, trying to avoid as much as possible any casualties.
Soon after the outbreak of the Second World War, the Irgun adopted a temporary truce with the British, essentially ending its violence against them. It was a move that, surprise, surprise, some Jews didn't like. So yet another splinter group took shape in 1940 when Abraham Stern, an Irgun commander, created the Lehi. The Lehi was a radical organization carrying out extreme operations, even political assassinations, against the British.
Abraham Stern, known by the name de guerre Jair, was a founding member of the Irgun, was also a poet, an admirer of the Russian nihilist campaign to kill the Tsar, but politically was more of an admirer of fascist Italy.
Early on during the Second World War, prior to the Nazi final solution, they actually attempted to coordinate with the fascist Italians and the Nazis to circumnavigate British limitations on Jewish immigration and get European Jews out safely. They actually viewed the Axis powers as lesser enemies than the British.
Stern led Lehi from 1940 to 1942. During that period, a lot of the members of the organization are arrested, so they had to make their money by stealing, extorting, and kidnapping wealthy Jewish businessmen. During this period, they killed 5 people, 2 bystanders by loose bullets on a shootout with the police, and 3 members of the Criminal Investigative Department. Of the 5 people killed by the Lehi under the leadership of Stern, 4 of them were Jewish. As an answer to all of the killings of the Lehi, the Haganah started rounding up and arresting members of the organization. The Criminal Investigative Department also led a manhunt against Stern. Stern was found and killed by the head of the CID in Tel Aviv. After his death, Stern became a martyr for the Zionist cause, being praised to this day in Israel.
The Defense Ministry held a special contest for young boys and girls, testing their knowledge of Yair's heritage and legacy. 100 years after the birth of Avraham Yair Stern, young boys and girls from throughout Israel came to participate for the first time ever in a quiz on the legacy and writings of the Lehi commander. More than 300 kids participated in the initial tests. The top 35 were acquitted to take part in the final stages of the contest.
This
topic interests me very much. I've learned about it since 4th grade. We asked questions about his life, the operations that his organization carried out, fighting against the British, trying to drive them out of the land of Israel, and struggling to establish a Jewish state. I learned from this about heroism of people who cared.
The Lehi veterans joined the event. They didn't compete with the kids on the knowledge of Lehi history, rather saw with their own eyes how their actions became a legend to inspire.
We were criticized, slandered, and libeled for years, and so it's a great pleasure to see this. They are the new generation that will work for the true independence of the nation and the state. They will not let anyone give up parts of the land of Israel.
An article from the Jerusalem Post called "How Should Abraham Stern Be Remembered?" reads,
At the time, most Jews considered Stern, known by his nom de guerre as Yair, to be a bold nationalist maverick. But over the decades since his death, Stern has increasingly edged into the Israeli consensus. Today, the apartment in Tel Aviv's Florentine neighborhood where Stern was murdered is Beit Yair, a defense ministry museum that honors Stern's legacy and Lehi's accomplishments. In addition, with Abraham Stern streets ubiquitous across Israel, the upscale town of Tohar Yair established in his memory, the Israeli Postal Service issuing a stamp commemorating him, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu naming his firstborn son, Yair. The one Zionist renegade is now Israeli mainstream.
They also tried to use the words of Mandela to whitewash Stern and Lehi.
Nelson Mandela, democratic South Africa's first president, wrote that in the struggle for liberation, he distinguished between legitimate acts of resistance that target the apartheid regime and its machine of repression, and the indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians. The former, acceptable armed struggle, the latter, illegitimate terrorism. According to this formula, Stern's attacks against the organs of British subjugation, officialdom, military and police, should be viewed as justified insurgency. Even in the politically questionable case of Lord Moyne, was not Lehi's chosen victim the senior representative of British colonial rule?
But by doing this, they ignored that Stern was a founding member of the Irgun, being part of the organization between 1937 and 1939, when they were targeting Arab civilians. They also ignored that the Lehi between 1947 and 1948 went back to targeting civilians, and they participate in the Deir Yassin massacre. This article was written by a former assistant of the current Prime Minister of Israel. Menachem Begin came into the picture after the death of Stern. In 1942, he joined the Irgun, becoming the leader of the organization in 1943. Before, he was a member of Betar, managing to reach the position of leader of the organization in Poland before leaving the country when the Nazis invaded it. His attacks against the British start with the destruction of British infrastructure. During the period when the Irgun avoids any deaths, they still collaborate with Lehi, launching simultaneous attacks. Over time, they join Lehi in the killing of British soldiers and police officers, still avoiding civilian casualties. Some people might say that this means that he makes the Irgun into a legitimate resistance movement, but he joins an organization that 3 years before was bombing vegetable markets, and after the British left in 1947, the Irgun went back into targeting Arab civilians. From 1942, the Irgun focused their propaganda towards the USA, with the American League for a Free Palestine managing propaganda and funding campaigns. The American League for a Free Palestine was created by a founding member of the Irgun, called Hillel Kook, also known as Peter Bergson. He also created the Hebrew Committee for National Liberation. The American League for a Free Palestine supported the Irgun and Lehi openly. They ran through American, French, Mexican and South American newspaper an ad that said,
"Every time you blow up a British arsenal or let go with your guns and bombs the betrayers of your homeland, the Jews of America make a little holiday in their hearts. Hand on, brave friends, our money is coming."
Let's say that the British did not like the American League for a Free Palestine and complained to the US government about their support of terrorism and that the organization was a philanthropic, tax-exempt organization in the US. But the US government did not care. Going back to Begin, he formed the Likud party in 1973 with Ariel Sharon, both having in common being the leader of a group involved in the massacre of at least one village. In 1978, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, while Likud was supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa. In 1982, under his leadership, Israel invaded southern Lebanon. During the invasion, the Sabra and Shatila massacre was facilitated by the IDF. The IDF surrounded the neighborhood of Sabra and the refugee camp of Shatila. Sabra was a Muslim-majority neighborhood. The IDF then allowed Christian Lebanese militias known as Falangists to enter and massacre during a whole night, killing 3,500 civilians. Begin also wrote a book called The Revolt, talking about his struggle against the British. The book has been recommended by Northern Irish terrorists and was found in a library belonging to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But the influence doesn't end there. A lot of tactics we associate with more modern terrorist organizations were introduced or popularized by the Irgun or Lehi, not limiting their terror attacks to one country. The targeting of markets and public transports, the use of IEDs by the roadside, taking hostages and making demands, and the use of car bombs and parcel bombs. In 1943, Yitzhak Shamir, that until then was the right hand of Stern, became the head of operations of Lehi. Under his leadership, they focused on killing police, soldiers, and high-ranking British politicians. During this period, Lehi managed to assassinate two important figures, one being Lord Moyne in Cairo in November 1944. He was the minister resident of the Middle East for the British. He was also a friend of, at the moment, Prime Minister Churchill. The other important figure assassinated by Lehi was Folk Bernadotte, an UN mediator in the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1947 and 1948. They assassinated him because Lehi was opposed to a peace treaty. During World War II, Folk Bernadotte had successfully negotiated the release of 31,000 Jewish prisoners from a concentration camp. After the creation of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir joined the Mossad. In 1986, he became the Prime Minister of Israel and the leader of the Likud party.
These
Well,
videos are
you know all those
like
Jews that are running around bombing everywhere around the world? No, it doesn't fucking exist.
Oh,
it's
really?
only in Islam.
The Irgun did not limit their attacks to the territory of Mandatory Palestine. They also bombed the British Embassy in Rome and 3 different targets in Austria. Lehi went a step forward, bombing the British Colonial Club in London, and launched also a campaign of attacks using parcel bombs targeting British politicians in England. The main bomb maker of Lehi claimed inventing the parcel bomb. The campaign was not a success, as they didn't manage to wound or kill any politician, and most of the parcel bombs were intercepted before reaching their destination. But Lehi continued using the tactic after this campaign. I've already mentioned that Lehi had the habit of kidnapping wealthy Jewish businessmen, but it's the Irgun the ones that introduced the taking of hostages and making demands. The first 2 hostages they took were British civilians. Later, they focused on taking British officers. The demand usually was commuting a death sentence to a member of the Irgun. Most of the times this tactic worked, but on some occasions it didn't. Days after the execution of 2 Irgun members, 2 British non-commissioned officers that had been kidnapped were discovered hanging from a tree. The Irgun had mined the area. A bomb diffusion squad cleared the area but missed that the bodies were also booby-trapped. When one of the bodies was cut down, it exploded, wounding a British officer. On another occasion, an underage member of the Irgun, because the Irgun had underage members, was flogged. As an answer, the Irgun abducted 6 British soldiers and flogged them before releasing them. They claim responsibility for the action with this communicate.
For centuries you have been whipping natives in your colonies with impunity. In your foolish pride, you dare to consider the sons of Israel in Eretz Israel as natives too. You are mistaken. Zion is not exile. The Hebrews are not Zulus. You will not whip Hebrews in their homeland, and if you do, then His Majesty's officers will be whipped in full public view.
After the hanging of the British soldiers, the British tried to leave as fast as possible from Mandatory Palestine. In 1947, they stopped managing the mandate. After the British leave, the Irgun and Lehi start targeting Palestinian Arabs in a new campaign of terror, shooting and bombing bystanders, using barrel bombs, bombing buses, bus stops, using IEDs and car bombs. During this period, the Lehi and the Irgun perpetrated the Deir Yassin massacre, killing 110 villagers. It's during this period when the Haganah joins the Irgun and Lehi in the targeting of civilians. Their units were involved in the Balad al-Shaikh massacre, killing between 17 and 70 villagers, and the Sasa massacre, killing 60 villagers. The 3 paramilitary organizations are the main actors in perpetrating the Nakba. After the formation of Israel, all paramilitary organizations were disbanded and integrated in the IDF. Some stick to the IDF, others, like Begin, became politicians. But that is not the end. The Kach movement was founded by Meir Kach. He was the founder of the Jewish Defense League in 1968. In 1972, he was convicted of plotting to bomb the embassy of Libya in Brussels. After that, he formed the Kach party and became a minister in Israel's parliament in 1984. The Kach party was illegalized in 1988 for being too racist. Their campaign included expelling all Arabs from Israel and Palestine and expanding the territory of Israel with territories of Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. Meir Kach was assassinated in 1990. The Jewish Defense League was a far-right organization in America. Its goal was to fight anti-Semitism, but their activities included trying to kidnap a plane using handguns and a grenade, the use of firebombs, pipe bombs, and the assassination of Alex Odeh, regional director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee in 1985, with a parcel bomb. In 2001, they planned bomb attacks against a mosque, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and an Arab American congresswoman. The French section of the Jewish Defense League, known as the Ligue de Défense Juive, participated in attacks against French Muslims, pro-Palestine activists and journalists. Members also have been arrested for attacking a library and firebombing the car of an anti-Zionist Jewish blogger, between others. But the Kach movement didn't end with the Jewish Defense League. Terrorists with Kach sympathies have launched attacks against Palestinians in the occupied territories. One of the most well-known being the Cave to the Patriarch massacre, perpetrated by Baruch Goldstein. He entered a mosque dressed as an IDF soldier, killed 29 and wounded 125 people before being killed himself. The Jewish Defense League made him a martyr on their website. The hooligan group La Familia from the Beitar Football Club have been using Kach symbology. They are known as a racist and Islamophobic group. Also, Israeli settlers in the West Bank have shown sympathies for the movement and its goal. They have also launched terror campaigns against local Palestinians. Today, the Kach movement is represented in the government with the Minister of Security of Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He is the leader of the Otzma Yehudit party, and before joining the government, he was charged with racism, possession of propaganda from a terrorist organization, and support of a terrorist organization. My goal with this video is not to place judgment in these different paramilitary organizations, but to break and expose the double standards that Zionist propaganda is presenting to the world. I'm not here to say which groups are good and which groups are bad. I guess I'm just tired of the hypocrisy of the state of Israel pointing at everybody and calling them barbarians, and then turning around and putting medals on people that were targeting civilians. And I guess I just don't like how they manipulate history to fucking ignore the periods where these organizations were targeting civilians. I guess I don't have much more to say, but free Palestine.